Hello, my name is Sabina. I'm 60. I grew up in Europe, but I have lived and worked in New York for over 30 years. I'm white. I'm a mother and a grandmother, a social worker and psychotherapist, and I'm Catholic. I think I was always drawn to working with people at the margin because despite my privileged background, I moved around a lot and I was often the other. I am a student at the Jesuit School of Theology.
My name is Jasmine. I'm a 36-year-old Afro-Latina, born and raised in New York City. I'm a sister, a daughter, a student at Fordham University's Graduate School of Religion and Religious Education, a spiritual mentor for the incarcerated, and a church worker. Growing up at a Jesuit parish and attending Jesuit schools have all influenced my drive to serve others. While growing up in poverty in a neighborhood where there was housing and food insecurity, in addition to poor access to healthcare and quality education, have inspired me to look for ways to make systemic changes.
At the beginning of this sharing, we want to invite you to a moment of mindfulness so that we can connect from a space of heart and mind. So we invite you to turn your attention inward, maybe close your eyes, and notice your breathing. Breath as source of life, as spirit. We invite you to feel your heart space and maybe ask yourself, why am I here? Why is this important to me? And knowing that we're not in this alone, you may imagine the faces of many other participants who will join in this conversation. A feast for all people. So now that we are all connected, heart and mind, we're going to start our presentation, which is called Sharing Power, From Charity to Justice. Now, this title may be more appropriate for a semester-long course than for a brief presentation. Therefore, we do not assume to offer a comprehensive analysis, but rather just a few reflections coming from our experiences and our desires for ourselves and for our church. It is our hope that a greater implementation in the church of ideas already expressed in various documents with regards to inclusion and sharing power will lead to more just institutions and processes in the church and in society at large.
Part 1, Shared Power, a Call and a Duty. This first quote is from Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Philanthropy is commendable, but it must not cause the philanthropist to forget the circumstances of economic injustice which make philanthropy necessary. End quote. The church has emphasized charity for much of its history. It is explicitly expressed in 4 of the 7 corporal works of mercy, which are inspired by Matthew chapter 25, verses 35 to 36. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, and shelter the homeless. The church has done remarkable work in the charity sector, bringing relief to many, and has helped change countless lives, mine included. Charity is an important piece of the work we are called to do as Christians, but the emphasis on justice has not been equally stressed. If we are to truly love our neighbor, then we ought to seek eradication or at least drastic reduction of their need for charity, and that is where justice comes into play. If we believe in the dignity of every human, as we proclaim it in our catechism and countless church documents, it requires that we do all we can do to ensure that all people are living dignified lives and that their basic needs are met. The food, medical care, access to education, and housing they need to survive. Unfortunately, this has not been possible because of persistent inequalities and the structures and systems that support those inequalities. The next quote is from John chapter 15, verse 15. I no longer call you slaves, because a slave does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends, because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. End quote. Yes, in most parishes in the US, large urban centers, educational institutions, faith-based nonprofit organizations, we've made strides in welcoming diversity through hiring policies and other initiatives, making our institutions more accessible to all. But do we really call everyone friend? Being friends assumes that the friends are equally heard, have equal weight, are co-creators in the initiatives and tasks undertaken, and not only in the diversity sphere or department or committee, but equal footing across the ground. In John chapter 14, verse 21, Christ announces that those who believe in him will do the works he has done and even greater than he has done. If none are great but the master, as we hear in Mark 10, verse 18, and the master finds way to share his power, then as his followers, are we not called to do the same? That requires a radical conversion where, like John the Baptist, he says that Christ must increase and I must decrease. Decreasing is not our favorite thing. Part 2, challenges of undergoing a true conversion towards shared power. We want to mention 3 of the many challenges that have impeded a greater shift towards justice and shared power in the church: structures and systems, a scarcity mentality, and risks and dangers. Structures and systems. The top-down hierarchical structure of our society and the church has been a great impediment to the advancement of social justice. From ancient patronage to the popes selling indulgences to the aristocrats, to keeping big donors happy in parishes, nonprofits, and academic institutions, we know that the hubs of wealth and power work together. A solid hierarchical system makes sure that these privileges are protected and that the attempts to change the system get pushed back. It's no secret then that the way things are now and have been are not the way Christ would have them, as he freely and generously shared and shares his power by allowing us to do great things in his name. How can we, in the face of these structures and systems, and as part of these structures and systems, truly live out our mission as Christians and love our neighbors as Christ loved and loves us? The willingness to share power is required in order to bring to fruition the change needed for true equity. Scarcity mentality. Initially, when we think of sharing, we think that it will mean less for us, but perhaps we can think of it a little differently. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 26, we are reminded that our needs will always be met, yet we continue to operate with a scarcity mentality. It's a mentality where fear dominates, where we see the other, whether the refugee, the poor, or the one not like us, as a possible threat to our identity, comfort, and beliefs. That is in stark contrast to a Christ who fulfills the needs at a wedding and turns water into wine, and multiplies fish and loaves when a crowd of hungry people follows him. Or a Jesus who says to his disciples who are afraid of someone to steal his patent, do not prevent him, for whoever is against us is for us. The moment we are able to see that the other doesn't take but gives, that by sharing we are enriched and not deprived, we might think of our power as a lit candle that when it is used to light another candle, it is not extinguished. It simply helps create more light. Risks and dangers. Or perhaps the challenge is not scarcity, but the fears and complications that come with challenging the status quo. Going against the grain often comes with consequences that can place the rogue party in an uncomfortable and risky predicament. For example, as a light-skinned woman, I have privileges and access that my darker-hued brothers and sisters do not. When I am in circles and try to leverage those privileges to bring others to the table, I can be met with resistance. And also the reduction of my own power by way of rejection and being ousted. Then, not only am I without the power that benefits me, but I am also without the power that I can use to benefit others. This frame of mind, however, is fear-based and goes back to the scarcity mentality. I challenge this frame of thinking by reminding myself that the King of Kings, who has freely given us his power in his name, is still all powerful. Sharing his power has not diminished it by one bit.
Part 3. Processes that promote power sharing in communities and organizations. After looking at how shared power is a call and a duty, and at some individual and collective challenges, we want to propose 5 processes that, among many, we have found particularly helpful. 1, asking ourselves whose voice would make us whole. 2, creating practices that elevate the voices from the margin. 3, risking being transformed. 4, being aware of what we do and how we do it. And 5, reflecting and evaluating. As you will see, all of these practices require time, but if we are committed to a true feast for all people and by all people, then we need to put in the time. So 1, inclusive collaboration. Whose voice will make us whole? This is a quote from Asa Karan. Inclusion is not an ask for a favor, it is a requirement of wholeness. Jasmine and I are presenting together, struggling to fit into this brief 15 minutes, having had to carve out time to connect, to share, to reflect and edit together among life struggles, because doing it alone would have been incomplete. To be clear, the two of us, with our similarities and differences, are only representative of a small part of human beings. But working together allows each of us to be more aware of our biases and our limitations, and hold an orientation of inquiry rather than of expertise. Going back to the Gospels, we have many examples of deliberately naming, including, elevating men and women who were not part of the dominant group of the time. Why was that a practice for Jesus? So before starting a project or a committee or a new initiative, you may ask, whose voices would make us whole? 2, genuine collaboration. How do we elevate the voices from the margin? And this quote was written on a poster in France in 1968. You participate, she participates, he participates, I participate, they decide. Power differences are inevitably part of all groups and communities. Talking about it helps us come up with practices to dial down the volume of the voice of the dominant group and to raise the volume of members of the community who are granted less power in the group. For example, if there is only one representative of a marginalized group in a committee, support could be given to develop a consulting panel of their choice in order to have a forum where to share and brainstorm in a safe and generative space. Or if there are several members of different marginalized groups, a space reserved for them could be put in the calendar in addition to the meetings of the entire committee so that situations of marginalization and inequality could first be discussed in that setting. Not keeping in mind power differential in mixed groups likely affirms the dominant voice in the group and will not lead to genuine collaboration. Genuine collaboration is not only horizontal, but also vertical. For a culture to change in an organization, everyone needs to participate in the conversation, from the board member to the cleaning person or the security guard. Now, one might fault us for naming those two roles as the lowest in an organization, and that may not always apply. But pretending that we value each person and each job the same, and therefore we don't need to name that, supports the continued invisibility of those who are paid less and whose voice is rarely heard. 3, creating a safe space, risking being transformed. So Johnston cites Yves Cogar saying, true dialogue, which is the foundation for the church's relationship to the world, depends upon the capacity to accept the other as other and the willingness to be open to what the other can teach us. This speaks to the culture of encounter Pope Francis talks about, and certainly doesn't only talk about it as he's going to Iraq. Being impacted and transformed by the encounter with the other is risky. In most of our social encounters, we show up strategically. Our mind, often without letting us know, is used to answering questions such as, what parts of myself can I or should I bring to this meeting? What parts are better hidden or more likely not welcome? Communities and organizations can support their members to show up fully by starting each meeting or gathering with a few minutes of guided mindfulness or silent prayer. When that happens, we encounter the other from a space of authenticity. Listening is cherished, and right and wrong do not apply. Inviting each person to check in about their personal and professional life. That helps participants to feel more connected through their humanity and more open to being moved by the other. And not moving to rush decisions or conclusions until all voices are heard. It may seem like these practices are time-consuming, but like my grandmother used to say, if you do things well the first time, you don't need to do them over. Number 4, questions, 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 being aware of what we do and how we do it. The devil is in the details. You may have heard that. We may think we're doing God's work by inviting all to the banquet But do we know if they have transportation money to get there? Will the space be comfortable for all? How are we making the seating arrangements? Who decides on the menu? Is the invitation translated in different languages? Is the banquet at a time people can make it? Can they bring their families? These are just some of the questions that come up. Let's allow for a space for questioning. What we do every day and how we do it has a million of details, and each of those details can make a difference and or convey a different message. Number 5, reflect and evaluate. What's the impact? In the book Social Analysis, we find these questions: who makes the decisions? Who benefits from the decisions? Who bears the cost of the decision? Now, knowing that our human nature, as Ignatius of Loyola knew it, we know that even if we set in place a number of helpful practices, we tend to revert to what is more automatic, more comfortable, more efficient. Practices may become rote, and we lose alertness and awareness. The examen teaches us to invite God to reflect with us. What have been the graces, the signs of love, of connection, of wholeness? What are the challenges, the signs of division, domination, blindness? The questions in the above quote are important questions, revisiting how decisions are made and by whom, and looking at the impact that each decision has on individuals, families, and communities. The road from charity to justice is not easy, but essential, and sharing power can help us navigate it.
Part 4. We invite you to reflect on a few questions and enhance the conversation by forwarding your reflections to us. You will find slides at the end of the presentation with these questions and with the quotes we used during our presentation. First question: what part of you identifies as a person at the margin, and what part of you identifies as a person from the dominant culture at your place of ministry? 2, what is your power in your ministry or service? Or what power of the institution do you represent? 3, what part of you is not afforded space or voice at your place of ministry or service? 4, what are the how, when, where, and who that make access easier to some people in your community and keep other people away or at the margin? 5, what are some specific processes or policies in your institution or community that support inequality and prevent a genuine opening to all? 6, what may be an example of sharing that power that would welcome? 6, what may be an example of sharing power that you would welcome in your ministry or place of service? And 7, what's at risk? What would you have to give up? Who would be the most unhappy about sharing of that power? Thank you for being with us during this time.